300 motorcycles going silent at exactly the same moment is a sound unto itself. Not the absence of sound, something else, something with weight. The way a crowd goes quiet at a funeral when the casket comes through the door, when every person present understands simultaneously that something has arrived that is larger than conversation. That is what happened outside Harlow County Fairgrounds in Sutter Creek, Tennessee, at 6:44 on a Saturday evening, September the 14th. 300 Hells Angels mid-rally, engines already running for the ride out, and then, all at once, not running, the chrome going still, the exhaust falling away. 300 men who had been loud a moment before choosing, without a word between them, to be the opposite of loud. Not one of them had planned it. It started 11 days earlier, on a Wednesday that smelled like rain on dry asphalt, when a man named Cole Ritter pulled his Softail off Highway 70 into the parking lot of a truck stop outside Sutter Creek, and a 9-year-old boy who had not spoken a word in 4 years walked up to him, tugged once on his sleeve, and pressed a folded paper napkin into his hand. The Sutter Creek Fuel and Feed had been at the junction of Highway 70 and Miller Road since 1969, and the building had the particular exhaustion of something that had survived several decades of Tennessee weather without ever being significantly repaired. The diesel pumps were original. The diner attached to the fuel stop had 8 booths, a counter with 7 stools, a pie case that rotated 3 kinds, apple, cherry, and a lemon meringue that the regular truckers called the lemon situation, not unkindly, and a laminated menu that had not changed its prices in 4 years because the owner, a woman named Patty Greer, had decided that printing new menus was a cost she could defer until something else made her. The Wednesday lunch crowd was a thin one, 2 truckers at the counter, working through plates of the daily special, which was meatloaf with sides that Patty described as whatever came in. A couple in a booth near the window, not talking to each other in the specific way of people who have been together long enough that silence requires no explanation. A man in paint-spattered work clothes nursing a coffee at the far end of the counter. The parking lot held 6 trucks, 1 station wagon, and a 2019 Harley-Davidson Softail Slim in matte black that had been there since 11:15 and belonged to Cole Ritter, who was in the second booth from the door eating the meatloaf and considering whether the situation in his left knee, which had been the situation in his left knee for 3 years since a truck door opened into him on I-40 at highway speed, had finally become the kind of situation that required an actual physician rather than just his ongoing strategy of ignoring it and hoping. Cole was 49 years old, 6 foot even, which on him looked taller because he carried himself with the posture of a man who had spent 20 years not being the smallest person in any given room and had internalized what that does to a spine. His cut bore the full patch of the East Tennessee chapter, 21 years in, road captain for the past 7. His beard was going gray at the jaw. His hands were the hands of a man who had been doing things with them his entire life, large, scarred across 3 knuckles on the right from something he did not talk about, steady in the way that the hands of calm men are steady. He was heading to Sutter Creek for the fall rally. He had left Knoxville at 9, which was 2 hours later than he had planned, which was typical. He had no particular timeline once he got there. The rally ran 3 days. He would sleep in a tent, eat from the food vendors, ride with whoever was riding, and spend the parts of those 3 days that were not riding or eating, sitting around fires with men he had known for 2 decades, which was the closest thing to rest that his particular nervous system knew how to accept. He was carrying something that year, though he would not have named it if asked. His mother had died in June, suddenly a stroke, the kind that does not give warning or time, and the summer had been the kind of summer where a man keeps himself moving because stopping means thinking, and thinking meant facing something he had not yet found words for, which was that she had been the only person on earth who called him by his given name, Raymond, and now no one did. He did not think about this at the lunch counter. He ate his meatloaf, he considered his knee, he drank his coffee, and paid Patty Greer, and left a tip that was larger than the check, which he always did at places like this, because he knew what the margins looked like. He was 3 steps from his bike when the boy appeared. Before we get to what was written on that napkin, if this is the first time you've found this channel, hit subscribe right now and drop your city and state in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to see how far this story travels before it's done. Now back to Cole. because what that boy handed him in the parking lot of the Sutter Creek Fuel and Feed would change the direction of 300 men 11 days later, and none of them saw it coming. The boy stepped out from between a parked station wagon and the propane cage at the side of the building. He was 9 years old, though he looked smaller. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans that were clean but worn thin at both knees. His sneakers were the kind that schools sometimes provide. No particular brand, institutional white, the laces replaced at some point with mismatched brown ones. He had dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that were tracking Cole Ritter with an attention that was not the attention of a child who was uncertain. He knew exactly who he had walked out to meet. His name was Eli Voss. Cole did not know this yet. Eli Voss had not spoken a single word since he was 5 years old, on the night his father did not come home from the plant on Route 12. And Eli's mother sat down on the kitchen floor and did not get up for what felt, to Eli, who had been standing in the doorway in his pajamas, like a very long time. The doctors called it selective mutism, which is what the medical system calls it when a child's voice goes somewhere inside them in response to something that cannot be undone, and the child cannot locate it anymore. Eli could hear everything. He understood everything. He communicated in writing and gestures, in the specific expressions of a child who has learned to make his face do the work his voice no longer would. He had been sitting on the retaining wall behind the propane cage for 40 minutes, watching the parking lot, waiting for the right person. He had tried 3 times in the past 2 weeks, once at a gas station in Harriman, once outside a diner in Rockwood. Each time, the person he approached had taken one look at him, standing alone, and grown uncomfortable. In the way adults grow uncomfortable around children they cannot immediately account for, which is to say they looked for his parents, found none, and left before the situation could become theirs. Eli knew that about adults. He had learned it the way children learn things that no child should have to learn, through repetition. Cole Ritter was different. Cole looked at the boy and did not look around for his parents. He looked at the boy and he waited. Eli held out the napkin. It was a paper napkin from the diner, the folded white kind, the kind that come in a dispenser on every table. He had written on it in blue ballpoint pen, pressing hard the way children press hard when they want to make sure the letters are clear. The handwriting was a child's handwriting, careful and slightly uneven, the letters large enough to be read from a short distance. "My name is Eli. I don't talk. My mom is sick and the man won't let us stay. He says we have to go, but she can't move. Please help." Cole read it once. He read it again. He looked at the boy. "Your mom is inside," he said. Eli shook his head. He pointed north up Highway 70. "Up the road?" A nod. Cole folded the napkin and put it in his chest pocket. He looked at the boy for a moment longer, at the mismatched laces, at the worn knees on the jeans, at the expression of a 9-year-old who had done the calculation and determined that a Hell's Angel in a truck stop parking lot was his best available option, and had decided to trust that calculation. "Show me," Cole said. They rode up Highway 70 for 1.75 miles, Cole keeping the Softail slow and to the right so the boy on the bicycle, a blue BMX with a bent rear reflector that Eli had retrieved from behind the propane cage before they left, could keep pace. The boy rode without his hands on the bars for the first quarter-mile, which Cole noticed. A child who could ride without hands on a BMX was a child who was comfortable with the machine. It was one specific thing to know about a person. Eli turned left onto a county road that the highway signage called Voss Mill Road, which was either a coincidence or not, and which Cole filed away. They went a quarter-mile down a gravel track that narrowed between 2 rows of old oaks until it reached a mobile home set back from the road in a cleared space that had at some point been maintained and was no longer. A vegetable garden gone to late summer sprawl. Firewood stacked but not recently stacked. The top layer had lichen on it, a wind chime that had lost most of its pieces, moving in the September air and making no sound. A red truck Cole did not recognize was parked in the gravel at an angle that suggested it had arrived quickly and the driver had not been concerned with where it ended up. The door to the mobile home was open. Not ajar, open, as though someone had left in a hurry or had not bothered to close it behind them, because they intended to make the closing final. Cole stepped up onto the small porch. Inside, past the open door, he could see the kitchen, dishes on a drying rack, a calendar on the wall, a child's drawing taped beside it, a woman's voice from further inside, not loud, then a man's voice louder. Cole stepped inside. The man's name was Dale Pruitt. And he was the kind of man who had never been given a reason to reconsider his first impression of himself. 43 years old, heavyset, wearing a Harlow County Property Trust shirt that he believed added official gravity to his presence in the same way that Gerald Pratt had believed in his gray suit, which is to say that the shirt communicated authority only to the people who were already afraid of him. He was standing in the narrow hallway of the mobile home with a sheaf of papers in one hand and a phone in the other. On the other side of him, in the back bedroom, a woman was lying in a hospital bed that had been moved into the home, the kind of adjustable bed that tells you a person's health situation before they say a word. Her name was June Voss. She was 37 years old, and she had been in that bed for 41 days with a degenerative condition that the doctors in Knoxville had given a long name and a short prognosis. She could sit up with help. She could not stand without assistance. She weighed, Cole would learn later, 91 pounds. Dale Pruitt was telling her that her lease had lapsed. He was telling her this in the voice of a man who enjoyed telling people things they could not argue with. The property trust had purchased the land that the mobile home sat on. The mobile home itself was June Voss's property, but the land was no longer hers to sit it on. She had 30 days, which was the law, but the 30 days had elapsed, and the property trust required her to vacate. He said the word vacate with the satisfaction of a man who has always wanted to use it. "She can't move," said the woman beside the bed. This was June Voss's sister, Carol, who had driven from Maryville the previous week and had not left. She was holding a coffee mug with both hands, and her knuckles were white. "She literally cannot be moved right now without. That's a personal situation," Dale Pruitt said, "and not a legal one. There's a child." "I'm aware of the child." He had seen Eli in the doorway twice during this conversation and had made no acknowledgement of him other than that awareness, the particular non-acknowledgement of a man who has decided that a 9-year-old does not constitute a factor that should adjust his course. Cole stepped into the hallway. Dale Pruitt heard him and turned, and his expression went through a sequence of adjustments: surprise, then appraisal, then the calculation that men like Dale Pruitt make when confronted with men like Cole Ritter, which is to find the institutional advantage and lean on it. "This is private property," Pruitt said. "You need to leave." Cole looked past him at June Voss in the bed. He looked at Carol with the coffee mug. He looked at Eli, who had come in behind him and stopped in the kitchen doorway and was watching with the expression of someone witnessing the thing they have spent effort setting in motion. He looked back at Dale Pruitt. He said nothing. He just looked. The way a man looks when he has decided to understand a situation completely before he says a word about it. "I said you need to." "How much?" Cole said. Pruitt blinked. "What? How much does she owe?" "The lease." "What's the number?" This isn't about the money at this point. This is about." "What's the number?" Pruitt looked at the papers in his hand. The specific look of a man who had not expected to be asked to produce information rather than simply assert authority. "The arrears are 4,300 and if the arrears are cleared, then the matter of the lease. What happens to the lease if the arrears are cleared?" The room went quiet. The only sound was the wind chime outside making its soundless movement in the September air. Dale Pruitt looked at his papers. He looked at Cole. He looked at the phone in his hand as though it might tell him something useful. "The property trust would require a new lease agreement," he said finally, with less confidence than he had entered the room with, "and proof of ongoing." "Write down the number," Cole said. He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket and held out his left forearm bare below the rolled sleeve. "Right here." Pruitt wrote it. He pressed the pen harder than necessary, which told Cole something about the kind of man he was, a man who needed to assert himself physically even when he was losing ground. Numbers there. It appeared in blue ink on Cole's forearm. "For me back," Cole told June Voss. She looked at him from the bed. Her eyes were the eyes of a woman who had been told many times what was going to happen to her and had stopped, expecting the thing said to her to be something good. "I'll be back," he said again. She nodded. One small movement. Eli was standing in the kitchen doorway watching. Cole looked at the boy. The boy looked back. Cole held up one finger, 1 hour, and Eli nodded the same way his mother nodded, which was the nod of someone who had learned not to depend on what people said they would do, but who was choosing to try one more time. Cole walked out to the Softail. He took out his phone. He called the rally. What happened next has been described differently by different men who were there, because it happened fast and it happened in pieces. And 300 people experiencing the same thing simultaneously will always remember it in 300 slightly different ways. But the sequence, as best it can be reconstructed, went like this. Cole reached Ray Calder, the chapter president, at 3:17 in the afternoon. He described the situation in the specific way he described things, with the minimum number of words necessary to transfer the information accurately. June Ely Voss Mill Road, 41 days in a hospital bed, 91 pounds. Dale Pruitt and the Property Trust, $4,347. Ray Calder said, "Say it again." Cole said it again. Ray Calder was quiet for 4 seconds. "How old is the boy?" 9. Silence. "He wrote it on your arm." "Yes." Ray Calder said, "Don't move," and ended the call. The rally ground passed the word the way rally grounds pass things, person to person, fire to fire, the information acquiring the weight of context as it moved through men who knew what it meant for a boy who had not spoken in 4 years to walk up to a stranger in a parking lot and press a folded napkin into his hand. It moved through the ground in the time it takes for a fire to understand what direction the wind is blowing. By 4 o'clock, a collection was going. Not organized. No one had announced it. No one had set up a table. It moved the way it moved because that is what happens when 300 men, with a specific moral accounting of the world, hear that a 9-year-old boy has been carrying something that should not be carried by a 9-year-old boy. By 4:47, the total was $6,200. By 5:30, it was $8,400. Someone drove to an ATM in Sutter Creek. Someone else called a chapter in Cookeville. At 6:31, Cole Ritter arrived at the rally ground with the number 4,347 still visible in blue ink on his left forearm. He held up the arm. 300 men looked at it. Not one of them spoke. Engines. The sound of them starting is the sound of intention made audible. The gathering of something that has decided where it is going and is beginning to move. They started one by one, then in clusters, then all at once, the sound rising from the rally ground like something that had been waiting to rise. They rode in formation down Highway 70, Cole at the front, 300 behind him in a line that stretched back a quarter mile. The sun was going down over the Tennessee hills. The light was the color of a fire that has been burning for a long time. The road was empty in both directions except for them. They turned onto Voss Mill Road. The oaks on both sides of the gravel track made the formation compress, 2 abreast now instead of 4, and the sound of them moved through the old trees and bounced back. When they reached the cleared space in front of June Voss's mobile home, they spread across the gravel and the grass at the edge of the clearing and stopped. 300 engines went silent. All at once. Eli was on the porch. He had been there for some time, long enough that Carol had brought him a blanket that he had not put on, long enough that the light had changed around him, and he had not moved. He was watching the road. He had been watching the road for an hour. When the first headlights appeared between the oaks, he stood up. When the second and third and fourth and 20th and 50th headlights appeared behind them, he stood very still and watched in the way that children watch things that are larger than their vocabulary for them, not with fear, not with pure happiness, but with the specific expression of someone who asked for something they had not fully believed would arrive, and it has arrived, and they are not yet sure their body knows what to do with that. Cole stepped off the Softail. He walked to the porch. He crouched down to the boy's level, not because the boy was small, but because what he had to say was between them and not for 300 men behind him. "We've got it covered," he said, "all of it, and then some." Eli looked at him. "Your mom's not going anywhere," Cole said. "Nobody's taking this property. You understand?" The boy's face did something. It went through a sequence of expressions in the span of 3 seconds that most faces take years to cycle through. Not crying, exactly. The opposite of crying. The release of something that had been held against its will for a very long time in a very small body. He nodded. Then he did something he had not done with a stranger in 4 years. He put his arms around Cole Ritter's neck. Cole stayed very still. He brought one large scarred hand up and rested it on the back of the boy's head. 300 men stayed exactly where they were. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The clearing was the quietest it had been since the oaks were planted. Inside the mobile home, through the open door, June Voss had pulled herself up in the adjustable bed. She could see the porch. She could see the clearing. She could see 300 motorcycles parked in the last of the September light, and the men on them sitting in the silence they had chosen. She had not cried in 41 days. She had not had enough left to cry. She cried now. Dale Pruitt received a call from the Harlow County Property Trust's legal department at 7:30 the following morning. The call was brief. It referenced the arrears, which had been cleared in full the previous evening via a cashier's check delivered to the trust's office by a man in a Hells Angels cut who had waited at the door until someone accepted it and signed for it. It referenced the new lease agreement, which the trust had elected to execute at the previous rate. It referenced several other things: building code inspections the trust had been quietly avoiding, zoning questions about the land acquisition that had not been fully resolved, that the legal department's attorney had apparently been keeping in a file for some time, waiting for an occasion to raise them. The call lasted 9 minutes. Dale Pruitt did not vacate the property. June Voss did. She was moved 3 weeks later to a ground-floor apartment in Sutter Creek, accessible 40% below market rate. The landlord, a woman named Greta Simmons, who had heard the story from her nephew, who had been at the rally, refusing the first 2 months' rent check that Carol wrote and leaving a casserole on the counter that was still warm when they arrived. The rally had collected $8,400 in 40 minutes for a woman most of them had never met and a boy they knew only by a napkin. Cole Ritter rode back to Knoxville on Sunday evening. He rode slowly. He was not avoiding arriving anywhere. He was just riding, which was sometimes the only thing that organized the interior of a man who carried things he did not have the words for. He thought about his mother. He thought about the boy on the porch. He thought about what it meant to reach for something you were not sure would come and feel it come anyway. The hills were dark and the road was clean, and the Softail ran without complaint. The number was still there on his forearm when he got home. He had not washed it off. 4,346 in blue ink, pressed hard by a man who needed to feel powerful and felt it that way. Cole looked at it for a moment in the light of his kitchen. He washed it off. Some things are worth carrying only until they are done. Then you wash them off and you go to sleep, and in the morning the road is still there, waiting, and you ride it. There is a boy in Sutter Creek, Tennessee, who has not spoken in 4 years. He may speak again, he may not. The doctors do not know. What they know is that he is 9 years old, and he figured out that the man he needed was a man on a motorcycle. And he walked across a parking lot and pressed a folded napkin into that man's hand, and the man took it seriously. The rest followed from that. All of it followed from that. If you know someone who needed to hear this story today, share it with them. Like it so more people can find it. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below. If you had been in that parking lot, would you have stopped? Tell me where you're watching from. Type silent in the comments if this one got you.